It was a quiet autumn evening when Emily and her friends, Ben and Sarah, decided to spend the weekend at the old Graystone Manor. The mansion, abandoned for decades, was known for its eerie history. Locals whispered of a ghost that haunted the halls, a ghost that didn't cry or wail like most, but laughed. They called it the Grinning Ghost. Intrigued by the mystery, the trio packed their bags and drove to the manor, determined to debunk the legend. As they arrived, the wind howled through the broken windows, and the towering house loomed over them like a forgotten relic. Emily, ever the brave one, led the way inside. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. Cobwebs clung to the walls, and the floor creaked under their feet. "Is it just me, or does this place feel off?" Sarah whispered, her eyes darting around nervously. Ben shrugged. "It's just an old house, nothing scary about it." But Emily was already focused. She pulled out her voice recorder. "Okay, let's see if we can get anything on this." They made their way to the grand staircase, its once majestic railings now rotting and splintered. As they climbed, the temperature dropped, and an unsettling feeling washed over them. Sarah shivered. "Do you feel that? It's freezing." Suddenly, a soft chuckle echoed through the halls. They froze. "Did you hear that?" Ben asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily nodded, gripping the recorder tighter. The laughter was faint but unmistakable, a low, chilling sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It wasn't the kind of laughter that filled you with joy. It was sinister, mocking. They followed the sound to the upstairs parlor, a room untouched by time. The furniture was still in place, covered in layers of dust. But there, in the center of the room, was an old rocking chair, and it was moving, slowly creaking back and forth. Emily gasped. "That chair." Before she could finish, the laughter grew louder, more intense. It was as if the house itself was laughing at them. The chair rocked faster, and the temperature in the room plummeted. Ben took a step back, his face pale. "We need to leave, now." But as they turned to go, the door slammed shut, trapping them inside. The laughter echoed again, this time right behind them. They spun around, and there in the corner stood a figure. Its face was gaunt, its eyes hollow, and its mouth stretched into a wide, unnatural grin. The Grinning Ghost. It stepped forward, its laughter filling the room, bouncing off the walls. Emily's hands shook as she fumbled with the recorder, trying to capture the moment, but her heart raced too fast to focus. The ghost's grin widened as it approached. "Why so serious?" it whispered, its voice dripping with malice. "Don't you like to laugh?" Sarah screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the ghost's laughter. The room seemed to twist and warp, the walls closing in. Emily could barely breathe as the ghost loomed over them, its laughter vibrating in her chest, rattling her bones. Then, just as quickly as it had begun, the laughter stopped. The room was silent, the ghost gone. The door creaked open. Shaken, they bolted from the house, not daring to look back. As they reached their car, Sarah turned to Emily, her face pale. We need to tell someone." But Emily just stared at the recorder in her hand, her eyes wide. She pressed play, but all she heard was static. No laughter, no voices, nothing. Ben shook his head. It's like it never happened. But as they drove away, a faint chuckle echoed through the car, and the ghost's voice whispered in Emily's ear, "I'll see you again, soon." And from the rearview mirror, she swore she saw that same grinning face, watching them fade into the night. The following day, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they had brought something back with them. The laughter from the night before echoed in her mind, haunting her dreams. Determined to understand what they experienced, she started researching Graystone Manor's history. Later that afternoon, she found an old newspaper article from the 1930s. It detailed the story of William Graystone, the mansion's original owner, a man infamous for his eccentric parties and obsession with dark humor. He reportedly died laughing, literally, after an occult ritual gone wrong. His laugh, the article said, had never truly left the house. As Emily read the article, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah. "I heard it again, the laughter, in my house." A cold chill ran down Emily's spine. It wasn't over. That evening, Emily gathered Ben and Sarah at her apartment to talk. Sarah looked pale, her eyes darting nervously around the room, as though expecting the ghost to appear at any moment. "I'm hearing it too," Ben admitted, his voice low. "Last night in my apartment, I heard the laughter coming from the living room. I checked, but no one was there." Emily nodded. I think we've been marked. This ghost isn't tied to Graystone Manor anymore. It's tied to us. Sarah's hands trembled. What do we do? How do we stop it? Just as Emily was about to respond, the lights flickered. Then, the unmistakable sound of soft, sinister laughter filled the room. The temperature dropped instantly. They all turned toward the kitchen, where the sound seemed to come from, but no one was there. The laughter continued, louder this time, mocking them. Emily grabbed a flashlight and pointed it toward the hallway. The beam landed on a shadow. There, standing in the doorway, was the Grinning Ghost. Its hollow eyes locked onto them, the wide smile stretching across its face. We need to get out, Emily whispered, her heart pounding. Now! They left Emily's apartment in a hurry, but the ghost didn't stop following them. Days passed, and the encounters became more frequent, more aggressive. Every night, the laughter grew louder, the ghost appearing closer. Sleep became impossible. Each time they tried to rest, the sound of that sinister laugh would echo in their ears, forcing them awake. Ben, usually the most rational of the group, started to crack. One morning, he showed up to Emily's apartment with bloodshot eyes and shaking hands. I can't do this anymore, he muttered. It's driving me insane. I hear it even when I'm awake now. It's like it's inside my head, laughing at me. Sarah was no better. She had taken to leaving the lights on in her house 24/7, terrified of the dark, convinced the ghost would strike the moment the shadows lengthened. Her once bright, bubbly personality had been replaced by fear and paranoia. Emily felt the same weight pressing down on her. The ghost wasn't just haunting them, it was breaking them. Desperate for a solution, Emily reached out to an old paranormal investigator, Mrs. Hawthorne, who had dealt with malevolent spirits in the past. The investigator agreed to help, convinced that they had unleashed a dark entity from Graystone Manor that had latched onto them. They met at Emily's apartment that evening, setting up a small seance in the living room. Candles were lit, and Mrs. Hawthorne began chanting an incantation designed to communicate with the ghost and bind it to its original place of rest. The atmosphere grew tense as the room filled with an oppressive energy. The candles flickered, and the temperature dropped again. Emily's breath came out in visible puffs, the room feeling colder than ice. The laughter started faintly, far away, but it grew louder with each passing second. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew through the room, extinguishing the candles. The grinning ghost appeared before them, its laughter now a booming, menacing roar. Mrs. Hawthorne's voice wavered. You must leave this place. Return to where you came from. But the ghost only grinned wider. Its mouth stretched impossibly far, and its hollow eyes locked onto Emily's. In a voice that chilled them to the bone, it whispered, You'll never be rid of me. I'm part of you now. The group fled the seance, but they knew they couldn't keep running forever. Mrs. Hawthorne, though shaken, gave them one final piece of advice. Confront the ghost at Graystone Manor. It started there, she said. It must end there. Reluctantly, they agreed. Returning to the manor, they entered the house at midnight, the laughter already filling the air as if the grinning ghost knew they were coming. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with dread. The walls seemed to close in, the house itself alive with malevolence. They made their way to the parlor, where the ghost had first revealed itself. The rocking chair sat in the center, unmoving, but the laughter echoed all around them. Why are you doing this? Emily shouted into the darkness. What do you want? The grinning ghost appeared, its face twisted into that same unsettling smile. I want your fear, your suffering. It's delicious. Emily felt a surge of anger. You won't have it. Not anymore. Summoning all her courage, Emily stepped forward. The ghost lunged at her, but this time she didn't run. She stood her ground, facing it down. The laughter grew louder, almost unbearable, but she didn't waver. Then, just as quickly as it had started, the laughter stopped. The ghost's grin faltered and it began to fade, its form becoming more transparent. You can't scare me anymore, Emily whispered. With one final hollow laugh, the ghost vanished completely, leaving the house in silence. For the first time in days, the air felt lighter. The nightmare was over, or so they hoped. But as they turned to leave the manor, a faint chuckle echoed behind them, reminding them that some things never truly leave.